There's a moment when respect shifts sides, and almost no one notices the exact instant it happens. It's not when you raise your voice. It's not when you win an argument. It's not when you try to be more imposing. Respect shifts sides when the other person understands without you explaining that there's an invisible limit in you, and that this limit doesn't depend on their mood. Most people spend years trying to be respected the wrong way, pleasing too much, justifying too much, tolerating too much, accepting small invasions to avoid bigger conflicts. And without realizing it, they teach the world to treat them as someone negotiable. Respect slips away little by little, like water leaking from a poorly closed faucet. It doesn't make noise, but in the end, the bill arrives. Stoicism doesn't promise control over others. It promises something rarer, control over yourself. And that's exactly where respect starts to happen. Because true respect doesn't come from the fear you provoke. It comes from the clarity you maintain. It comes from the consistency of your behavior. It comes from the fact that you don't change your value based on the room's vibe. And that's felt almost immediately, even by those who can't explain it. When someone treats you carelessly, interrupting, belittling, testing boundaries, making jokes that humiliate, imposing urgencies as if your life doesn't matter, your body responds before your mind. You tense up, you smile without wanting to, you swallow the discomfort, you try not to make a problem. And the other person learns a simple rule: I can go further. Not because the person is a villain all the time, but because the dynamic allows it. Stoicism calls this confusion between what you control and what you tolerate. You don't control the other's intention, but you control what you accept as normal. And here there's a very common emotional pain between 35 and 65 years old. The feeling that you've become someone convenient. You're remembered when needed, interrupted when speaking, charged when you fail, ignored when you're quiet. You try to be fair, try to be patient, try to be polite, and still it seems like people walk all over you. This isn't a lack of kindness on your part. Often it's a lack of boundaries. And boundaries aren't aggression. Boundaries are self-awareness in the form of posture. Stoicism teaches a simple foundation. What's yours is yours. Your choices, your values, your dignity, your time, your attention. And what's not yours, the other's opinion, the other's temper, the other's education, can't be the center of your life. When you live trying to manage what's not yours, you become anxious, reactive, explanatory. And a reactive person always seems fragile in the eyes of the world, even if they're smart and competent, because the world respects those who aren't easily pushed out of themselves. Respect instantly doesn't mean magic. It means that, in an instant, you can change your inner place. You can stop begging for acceptance. You can stop explaining too much. You can stop laughing so as not to seem difficult. You can stop negotiating what should be obvious. And when you change that inside, the other notices outside. Not through pretty words, but through signals. Tone, rhythm, pause, gaze, silence, choice. Respect starts to emerge when your presence stops asking for permission. Stoic philosophy works with an idea that seems harsh but is liberating. No one can diminish you without your participation. This doesn't mean you deserve disrespect when it happens. It means there's a point inside you where you decide if that enters and settles or if it hits and finds a closed door. The problem is that a lot of people keep the door open out of habit, out of fear of rejection, out of need for approval, out of guilt, out of tiredness from conflict. And then they live in small concessions that turn into a lifetime of wear and tear. If you want respect, the first change is silent. Stop behaving like someone asking for space. There are people who enter a conversation as if apologizing for existing. They speak fast, interrupt themselves, correct their own sentence, laugh at themselves before others laugh at them, offer explanations no one asked for. This creates a smell of insecurity, and the world, unfortunately, tests the smell of insecurity. Not out of conscious malice, but because weak boundaries invite invasion. The Stoic doesn't strike a pose. He sustains his own center. He doesn't rush to fill silence, he doesn't rush to please, he doesn't rush to defend against an accusation that wasn't even made. Another change is even more important. Choose what you take seriously. One of the reasons respect is lost is that the person gets emotionally involved in everything. A criticism, a comment, a look, a joke. They react to every stimulus, and whoever reacts to everything becomes predictable. Whoever is predictable is controllable. Stoicism trains the opposite, emotional selectivity. Not everything deserves a response. Not everything deserves an explanation. Not everything deserves your energy. This isn't coldness, it's inner governance. It's maturity. There's a huge difference between being a peaceful person and being a person available for abuse. Stoicism is peaceful, but not permissive. It values justice, courage, temperance, and wisdom. Justice, not accepting the unjust as normal. Courage, not running from necessary discomfort. Temperance, not reacting with excess. Wisdom, choosing the best move, not the most impulsive. This set creates something the world recognizes quickly: stability. And stability by itself imposes respect because it takes away from the other the feeling that you can be manipulated by emotional pressure. There's also a point that needs to be said honestly. Respect isn't begged, it's established. And establishing respect can mean losing sympathy. A lot of people confuse respect with approval. Approval is fickle. It comes and goes based on convenience. Respect is harder. It stays even when the other doesn't like it. But to earn respect, you need to accept that some people will react badly when you stop being useful. When you stop accepting interruptions. When you stop responding to everything right away. When you say no without a soap opera. When you don't enter emotional games, someone might call you cold, arrogant, difficult. The Stoic understands this. Others' opinions aren't your court. Your court is your conscience. And here comes a deeply practical aspect. The way you treat yourself sets the tone for how others treat you. If you give yourself crumbs of sleep, of self-respect, of boundaries, of truth, the world notices. If you abandon yourself to keep the peace, the world notices. If you tolerate what humiliates you to not create a vibe, the world notices. Not because people are sophisticated observers, but because every human dynamic is pedagogical. You teach how you want to be treated by what you repeatedly allow. In this video, the proposal isn't to turn you into someone aggressive, nor someone dominant. The proposal is much more adult, to make you someone non-negotiable in the essentials, someone who doesn't explain as defense, someone who doesn't diminish themselves to fit, someone who doesn't use anger as strength, but uses clarity as a backbone. The change can seem instant because it starts in the first moment you stop betraying yourself. And maybe the most important question to open this path is this: in which situations do you lose respect for yourself to buy acceptance from others? Because as long as that happens, you'll keep trying to fix the external with an internal that's misaligned. Stoicism starts with alignment. Think with clarity, feel with sobriety, act with firmness. That's where a presence is born that doesn't need to ask for anything, and still changes the environment. There's a detail that separates those who are respected from those who are tested. The respected person doesn't live reacting. They choose when to respond, how to respond, and mainly what doesn't deserve a response. In everyday life, disrespect usually enters through small doors, not as explicit aggression but as constant interruption, diminishing jokes, last-minute requests, time invasion, emotional pressure disguised as urgency, criticisms thrown as if they were truths. Whoever wants respect can't live like someone always available to be pushed out of themselves. Stoic philosophy teaches that you don't control the other's mouth, but you control your center. And the center manifests in very practical signals: rhythm, pause, tone, posture, consistency. A person anxious to be accepted speaks too fast, explains too much, concedes too much. They try to fix the vibe before a real vibe even exists. And this creates a silent message. I'll adapt to anything to not lose you. The other might not formulate this consciously, but feels it. And when they feel it, they test. Because every boundary that's not sustained invites repetition. One of the strongest moves to gain respect, and that seems instant, is to stop justifying the obvious. Justifying too much is a type of emotional submission. When you say, "I can't," and then deliver a long explanation, you're asking the other to approve your decision. You're saying, it only counts if you agree. The Stoic posture is different. You decide, communicate with clarity, and don't open a court. This isn't arrogance, it's maturity. It's understanding that your life doesn't need to be approved every sentence. Imagine a simple scene. Someone asks for something at the last minute. If you respond with a speech, you create room for negotiation, guilt, and manipulation. If you respond with a short, firm sentence, "Can't today, I can look at it tomorrow," you establish the boundary as fact, not debate. Respect is born when the other realizes you don't move under pressure. They might insist, might make a face, might try to label you as difficult. But when you stay stable, without aggression and without guilt, the dynamic changes. Whoever respects boundaries learns. Whoever doesn't reveals themselves. In both cases, you gain clarity. Another essential point. The Stoic doesn't confuse peace with submission. A lot of people accept disrespect to avoid conflict, but that doesn't bring peace. It brings resentment. And resentment is a slow poison, because you start smiling on the outside and hardening on the inside. Stoicism proposes a different peace, the peace of not betraying your own dignity. That peace requires courage. Courage to say no when it'd be easier to say yes. Courage to stay silent when it'd be easier to explain. Courage to sustain a calm gaze when the other tries to provoke you. And here comes a very practical Stoic principle. Don't hand over your tranquility as currency. There are people who use emotional lack of control to dominate environments. They raise their tone, create urgency, dramatize, make accusations, put you on the defensive. If you enter that game, you lose what you have most valuable: inner governance. The Stoic doesn't need to win the other. He needs not to be dragged. This isn't passivity. It's strategy. It's understanding that your power starts when you don't react as the other wants. A sign of maturity is the ability to tolerate the tension of a boundary. When you start imposing boundaries, there might be discomfort. The environment might go silent. People might find it strange. You might be seen as someone who changed, and in a way, you did change. You stopped negotiating the essentials. But a lot of people backtrack at this point because they can't handle the tension. They apologize for respecting themselves. They soften the boundary with humor. They give an okay fine out of fear of seeming bad. Stoicism teaches to endure that discomfort without crumbling. The tension is temporary. The respect is lasting. Now, respect isn't just saying no. Respect is also consistency in small things. If you set a time and keep it, you respect yourself and train the world to take you seriously. If you promise and deliver, you create trust. If you speak little and with precision, you increase weight. If you don't complain about everything but also don't tolerate everything, you become someone hard to manipulate. Respect grows when your word becomes a reference. And this doesn't require performance, it requires coherence. There's a common mistake. Thinking respect comes from being tough. Toughness without wisdom turns into aggression or rudeness. And rudeness might scare for a moment, but doesn't build real respect. It builds fear or distance. Stoicism works with serene firmness. You don't need to humiliate anyone to be respected. You just need to be clear about what you accept and what you don't. And when necessary, act accordingly. An everyday example helps. Someone makes a joke that belittles you in front of others. The impulsive reaction is to laugh so as not to weigh it down. But laughing at that moment teaches, keep going. The aggressive reaction is to explode and create a spectacle, and that might put you as out of control. The Stoic reaction is simple and powerful. A short silence, a steady gaze, and a low, clear sentence without drama. Don't joke with me like that. Just that. No speech, no moralizing, no justifying. You don't need to convince. You just need to establish. And the world feels it when you speak from an aligned inner place. Another example. Someone interrupts you all the time. You could compete and raise your tone, or you could apply a Stoic posture. Keep speaking calmly, and when the interruption happens, stop, wait, and resume. As I was saying, that small repetition, without irritation, teaches the other to back off. If they insist, you can be even more direct. I'll finish and then you speak. A boundary said with tranquility has more strength than a boundary said with anger, because it shows you're not asking, you're leading. There's also the respect that comes from how you manage your time. Respected people don't live in absolute availability. They have boundaries for schedule, energy, and attention. Whoever responds right away to everything communicates that their life is porous, that anyone can enter. Whoever takes a little time, who chooses priorities, who doesn't apologize for being busy, communicates that there's structure. And structure imposes respect, not out of arrogance, but because it signals value. Stoic philosophy calls this living by principles, not impulses. When you live by impulses, the world pulls you. When you live by principles, you guide yourself. And principles need to be simple to work. I don't accept disrespect. I don't tolerate invasion. I don't negotiate my dignity. I speak with clarity. I don't explain too much. I keep what I promise. I don't promise what I can't. These inner rules, when they become habit, make respect appear almost like a physical consequence because you stop emitting signals of emotional submission. And there's an even deeper point. Respect starts when you stop competing for approval. Approval is fragile. Whoever lives seeking approval changes tone based on the other's mood. And that's felt. The Stoic knows. Others' opinions aren't my master. I can be polite without being obedient. I can be kind without being manipulable. I can be firm without being cruel. And when you live like that, people might not even like it in some moments, but they start to measure their words. They start to think twice before invading. They start to realize there's consequence. Not the consequence of revenge, but the consequence of access. Whoever doesn't respect loses access. And that, for many, is the only language that teaches. The instant respect, then, isn't a trick. It's an inner energy change that reveals itself in small decisions. Not laughing at what belittles you, not justifying the obvious, not responding to provocations, not rushing to please, not yielding to the discomfort of a boundary. When you do this a few times, the world starts to read you differently. And most importantly, you start to read yourself differently. You stop being someone who begs for space and become someone who occupies their own place. There's a type of respect you conquer without raising your voice, without imposing in a theatrical way, without trying to win anyone. It comes when the other person realizes they can't push you to an emotionally inferior place. And that happens, almost always, in 3 common everyday tests: the provocation test, the invasion test, and the guilt test. Whoever doesn't master these 3 lives hostage to others' moods. Whoever learns to cross them with serene firmness changes the environment without needing to explain anything. The provocation test is the most frequent. Someone makes an irony, a crossed joke, a just kidding comment that reduces you. Or they try to poke you with small jabs to see if you lose composure. The person wants a reaction, because reaction gives power. When you react with anger, you become predictable. Just press the right button, and you explode. When you react with a nervous little laugh, you become permissive. Just press the right button and you swallow it. Stoicism proposes a third path, rarer and more effective. You don't negotiate your dignity with impulse. You choose the response, and sometimes choose to give no response at all. Not out of cowardice, but out of sovereignty. There's a practical skill here. The pause. The pause is one of the strongest signals of self-respect. Whoever is insecure rushes to fill the silence. Whoever is manipulable rushes to justify. Whoever has an inner axis allows silence to exist. When a provocation comes, instead of responding on automatic, you take a short interval. Breathe. Look. And only then decide if it's worth responding. That pause changes everything because it breaks the emotional hook the other threw. It's like saying without saying, "You don't control my rhythm." And rhythm is power. But sometimes the provocation requires a verbal boundary. And the Stoic boundary is short, objective, without theatrics. The sentence doesn't need to be aggressive. It needs to be clear. Something like, "Don't talk to me like that." Or, "That's not acceptable." Or, "Stop." Notice what gives strength to these phrases. They don't ask, don't beg, don't justify. they establish. The person who provokes usually counts on two things. Either you'll laugh and allow, or you'll explode and lose control. When you respond in a simple and firm way, you break the pattern and create a new cost for the provocation. From there, the other realizes that joking with you has consequence, loses access, loses intimacy, loses space. The second test is the invasion one. It's when someone tries to invade your time, your space, your attention, as if you were always available. Last-minute requests, urgent demands, insistent messages, continuous interruptions. This test is cruel because it usually comes disguised as the other's need, and a lot of people fall for guilt. If I don't do it, I'll seem selfish. But respect doesn't exist where you don't protect your own time. Stoicism teaches that time and attention are finite resources. Therefore, choosing is virtue. And choosing includes saying no without feeling like a criminal. Here, the short phrase is decisive again. When someone invades, you don't need to defend your agenda like you're on trial. You communicate the fact. Not now. Can't today. I'll look at it later. I won't be able to attend. The secret isn't in the perfect phrase, but in the tone. Calm, firm, without anxiety. Whoever invades likes to feel you're uncomfortable refusing, because that discomfort is the door to manipulation. The person notices your guilt and pushes a little more. When you refuse with serenity, the invasion finds a smooth wall, no place to grab. There's an important detail. Many people try to impose urgency to dominate. They turn everything into yesterday. And you, to not disappoint, run. But that running teaches the other to disrespect you. The Stoic posture doesn't disregard responsibilities, but refuses the tyranny of manufactured urgency. You learn to ask a silent question before obeying. Is this really urgent, or is it the other's lack of organization? And even when it's urgent, you can still choose, I can help up to here, not up to there. Respect is established when you show your life has structure. Structure means not every demand becomes an order. And when people notice structure, they start treating you more carefully because they understand there's criteria. The third test is the guilt one. This is the most sophisticated and therefore the most dangerous. Guilt appears when you impose a boundary and the other reacts as victim. Phrases like, wow, you've changed. You're different. You don't care anymore. Only you can't. I'd do it for you. After everything I've done. The intention isn't always malicious, sometimes it's just habit. But the effect is always the same. Push you back to the old role, the role of who yields to keep peace. And if you yield out of guilt, you teach that your boundary is fragile. And fragile boundaries don't generate respect. They generate insistence. Stoicism works with a very useful distinction. Responsibility isn't emotional obligation. You can acknowledge the other's feeling without becoming hostage to it. A mature response can be simple. I understand you didn't like it, but this is my decision. Or, I respect your feeling, but I'm not changing this. That's gold because it shows two things at once. You're not attacking and you're not yielding. You don't need to belittle the other to stay firm. You just don't abandon yourself to avoid discomfort. A lot of people confuse respect with being liked. But being liked can turn you into a hostage. Stoicism doesn't teach you to be unpleasant. It teaches you to be free. And freedom has a cost. Some people will find it strange when you stop being manipulable. There might be silence, distance, small attempts at emotional punishment. This is where the training gets real. Because the respect you want isn't the respect from those who like your usefulness. It's the respect from those who recognize your boundary, even if they don't approve. That's maturity. Accepting that not every boundary will be celebrated, but every well-sustained boundary changes the dynamic. Now, there's a pillar that makes all this truly instant. The respect you have for yourself when no one's watching. If you treat yourself with neglect, the world notices. If you live belittling yourself in jokes, the world notices. If you live speaking badly of yourself, the world notices. If you live accepting crumbs, the world learns. That's why Stoic philosophy insists so much on inner coherence. Your private behavior sustains your public posture. The person who respects themselves inside doesn't need to perform respect outside. They just exist with access. And access is something that's felt. In everyday life, this translates into small choices. You stop explaining too much. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop laughing at what humiliates you. You stop accepting invitations that drain you just to not displease. You stop responding to messages like you're on call. You learn to say no without going into confession. You learn to say yes without sacrificing yourself. And mainly, you stop arguing your boundary. You communicate and sustain. There's a difference between firmness and rigidity. Rigidity comes from fear. If I yield an inch, I lose everything. Firmness comes from clarity. I know what's acceptable, and I know what's not. Rigidity usually comes with aggression. Firmness comes with calm. The Stoic chooses firmness because it doesn't destroy their own heart. It doesn't need to humiliate the other nor win. It just needs to keep the center. That's what gives respect. You're not easy to push, and also not dangerous to approach. You're stable, and there's a final point, which is almost a simple secret. Respect isn't a phrase, it's a repeated pattern. The instant happens when you change the first response. But respect consolidates when you repeat. When you don't backtrack out of guilt. When you don't yield under pressure. When you don't explain to be accepted. When you keep dignity even in the details. The world learns by what repeats. And over time, even those who don't like your boundary start to respect it, because they understand testing doesn't work. In the end, what Stoic philosophy offers you isn't a social trick. It's a character construction that turns into presence. And presence is a language everyone understands, even without theory. When you're whole, the other notices. When you're aligned, the other measures words. When you don't betray yourself, the other has less space to betray you. And this starts now, in the next situation where you feel the old impulse to yield to avoid discomfort, and instead, choose the firm calm of someone who decided to respect themselves. The respect you want isn't the respect that comes from fear. Fear is fragile, theatrical, noisy. It lasts while you scare, and disappears at the first instant the other notices a breach. The respect that sustains an adult life is different. It comes when people understand you have an axis, that you don't explain out of anxiety, that you don't yield out of guilt, that you don't sell yourself for approval, that you don't enter emotional games just to preserve a false peace. Stoic philosophy is direct on this point. There's no technique that compensates for an ungoverned interior. If you try to seem strong outside and keep betraying yourself inside, the world notices. And not because the world is wise, but because social life has a cruel instinct for identifying who is asking permission to exist. The body speaks. The tone gives away. The rush denounces. The excess of justifications begs. And when you live begging without realizing, you teach the other to treat you as someone always negotiable. That's why the quickest change is silent. It doesn't start with the other. It starts in the moment you stop abandoning yourself to avoid discomfort. You don't need to win anyone. You just need to stop offering your dignity as bargaining chip. The Stoic learns to endure the tension of a boundary, that small internal burn when you say no, when you don't laugh at what belittles you, when you don't respond immediately, when you don't enter the drama. That tension is the price of freedom. And freedom is the ground where respect grows. Maybe you're thinking, but some people are naturally disrespectful. Yes. And exactly because of that, the Stoic posture is so valuable. It doesn't depend on others' good manners to work. You don't control if someone is rude, manipulative, or invasive. You control if that person will have access to your time, to your attention, to your intimacy, to your emotional body. And that's a turnaround. When you realize your control isn't in changing the other, but in deciding what you allow, you stop begging and start leading. Leading isn't bossing. Leading is sustaining a standard, a simple standard. I don't accept disrespect. I don't negotiate my dignity. I don't justify out of fear. I don't respond to provocation as if it were an order. I don't buy peace with self-abandonment. When these principles become habit, Respect appears almost as a natural consequence. People start thinking before invading. They start measuring words. They start realizing that with you there's no ground for cheap tests. And if they insist, the consequence doesn't need to be a fight. It can be distance, less access, less availability, less intimacy. The strongest consequence many times is simple. You withdraw from the game. Emotional maturity appears here as a daily choice. You're not trying to control the image others have of you. You're trying to align your life to your value, and that changes even your tiredness. Because part of adult tiredness comes from living explaining yourself, adapting, bending, correcting to fit others' expectations. When you stop doing that, energy is left for what matters. Work with meaning, relationships with reciprocity, true rest, real presence. The respect that comes from your axis isn't just a social gain, it's a gain of inner peace. And there's an honesty that needs to be said. Not everyone will like your firmer version. Some people preferred you when you said yes out of fear. Some people liked the easy access, your rush to please, your willingness to justify. When you change, those bonds might find it strange. There might be passive-aggressive comments. There might be guilt attempts. There might be distance. This isn't a sign you're wrong. Often it's just the sign that the invisible agreement changed. You stopped accepting a role that diminished you. And that kind of change has a price. But the price of not changing is usually bigger because it's paid in silence, in resentment, in self-esteem, in health. Stoicism doesn't turn you into someone cold. It turns you into someone sober. And sobriety is different from hardness. Sobriety is clarity without theater. It's firmness without cruelty. It's self-control without self-punishment. It's the ability to say no without anger and yes without sacrificing. It's being able to stay silent without needing to defend. It's being able to be polite without being obedient. When you cultivate this, respect stops being a request and becomes an effect. If you want to keep an image to take from this video, keep this. Respect is a door. Not everyone has the right to enter. Some have access to the hallway, others to the room, few to the most intimate place. The mistake of many people is leaving the door always open and then getting upset with whoever enters, dirtying everything. The Stoic posture is different. You decide who enters, and you also decide under what conditions. Not as a power game, but as an act of emotional hygiene. Because dignity isn't vanity. Dignity is the minimum base to live without losing yourself. And the instant happens exactly here. In the first moment, you sustain a boundary without excuses. In the first moment, you don't laugh at what belittles you. In the first moment, you don't rush to justify. In the first moment, you don't respond to drama with drama. It's a small instant, but it reorganizes your place in the world, and more importantly, reorganizes your place inside yourself. If this reflection helped you see a blind spot, that subtle way of betraying yourself to avoid tension, leave in the comments a short phrase. What boundary do you know you need to sustain with more serenity from now on? Like the video, so it reaches more people who are trying to stop living asking for space. Share with someone you know lives in yield to avoid conflict mode, and subscribe to the channel to keep receiving practical, mature, and applicable reflections with the kind of calm that strengthens inside and changes what happens outside.